right.
Okay, good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yolanda Irvin, and I serve as the Executive Director for Multicultural Services and Programs. I want to welcome each and every one of you to our first Radical Self-Care Mind series. So this is the first in the Mind series. We want to make sure everyone understands that this is being recorded because I'll share the recording. But if there's anything confidential or anything that you would not like me to share, please let me know, and Dr. Stanley can stop the recording, because I don't want anyone to feel like they can't be authentic and speak their truths. Those that are participating in this one will get the digital handbook, so that will come later. Also, there is a raffle, I do believe, of 4 books, but Dr. Stanley can address that. So today's panelist is led by Dr. Kimberly Stanley, Assistant Director, Department of History, College of Arts and Science at Indiana State University.
Professor.
Sorry, assistant. You know what? That's on the website. I'm just putting it out there. And I knew I was wrong.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Assistant Professor, Department of History. But it's in there. In the African American Studies program in the Department of History. She teaches courses on African American and United States history and culture. Her research focuses on discourse, analysis, and constructions of racialized, and gendered identities. She is currently working on her manuscript, Pulling Down the House and Tearing Up the Yard. Cool. The Black Press, Black Masculinity, and the Making of the New Negro. I like that title. Well, thank you, Dr. Kimberly Stanley. Our next panelist is Siobhan. Did I get it right?
Yeah, Siobhan.
Siobhan, take it. Carter David, Associate Professor, Department of History, and Affiliate Faculty in Women's and Gender Studies at Southern Connecticut State University. Teaches in areas of fashion studies, women's studies, and African American diaspora, and contemporary United States history. As a public historian, she has worked with museums, special collection curators on projects involving various facets of African American broad-based United States cultural history. She is also an author of several chapters and articles in edited volumes, exhibition catalogs, academic journals, and is completing her book manuscript, Issuing the Black Wardrobe, Magazines and Fashion Post-Soul. I like that. These names are rocking, I'm just saying. Our next panelist, Dr. Charlene Fletcher, is Emerging Voices postdoctorate. We're no longer, okay, no, I'm sorry, Emerging Voices, because I don't know what we're celebrating, so I don't want to, okay. Emerging Voices postdoctoral research associate in slavery and justice at Brown University, and a historian of the African American experience in the American South. That's totally cool. She holds her PhD in history from Indiana University, as well as a master's degree in criminal justice from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Prior to IU, she led a large reentry initiative for formerly incarcerated women and men in New York City. Her dissertation examined the experiences of confined African American women in Kentucky and reconstruction to post-progressive era, specifically exploring locals and socially constructed arenas of confinement. Oh, that's totally cool. As mental health and domestic spaces. So that's extremely interesting. What was your, okay, I'm sorry. I will not ask questions. I'm sorry. Okay, we have Dr. K.T. Ewing. Did I get it right?
Yep, Ewing.
Lord have mercy. Is an associate professor of history at Tennessee State University. As an alum of Xavier University of Louisiana and a third generation HBCU graduate, she is dedicated to preserving Black cultural and intellectual spaces. Her research interests include African American history and women and gender studies, and the influence of blues culture in American society. Her current book project, Remember My Name, Alberta Hunter and the Toothpaste Archive, is a biography examining the life of Alberta Hunter. Okay. A 20th century blues and cabaret singer in Memphis, Tennessee. My folk are from Memphis, so I have to look her up. Okay. See, and then Dr. Kimberly will tell you about this drawing. Okay, so I will stop sharing and I will give the floor over to our panelists. Please change to speaker viewers. Please engage and enjoy yourself. Thank you very much.
So first, welcome. Welcome to, I guess the sort of the inaugural or second inaugural presentation or panel on Black women and radical self-care. And I am so excited because the women that are here with me today, I've asked, they stood me up a couple times for talking in my classes. So this is me getting them in my class, like us having a conversation right now. I know Charlene, Dr. Fletcher, can we all get an applause for Dr. Fletcher, who just got that PhD and now at Brown University. So yes. So I'm crazy right now, so I don't even know where to begin, but I will begin. I would also like to, for us to send out good thoughts to Jasmine Sutton, who, as Dr. Irving, she showed a cover of Jasmine's book. She was also supposed to join us, but practicing radical self-care and recognizing that no is a sentence, she decided to step aside for today. But to honor her and in honor of her mispresence, we will be raffling off 2 copies of her book. How that will work, I don't know. And also another sister friend of mine, her name is Shayla Lawson. I have 2 copies of her book to raffle off too. It's called This Is Major. So we actually have 4 books to raffle off. First, as we begin this discussion of Black women and radical self-care, let me I've already took our panelists through my processes for this panel, but let me, for people who are watching and engaging and wonder what this is about, when Dr. Irving mentioned her idea for a radical self-care panel, she sent out a list of ideas that she had, and I got really excited because there were some really great topics. And immediately following that email, I think maybe within 2 minutes, I get another email, and it's a personal email asking me to just do the history part of it. And I went like, oh, okay. Well, all these great topics that I wanted to do. But it got me to thinking about Black women who do history and why we do history, considering history is still very much a white male dominated discipline. How our presence is often marked with violence, not just like a physical violence, but we are entering in spaces that we, through microaggression and sometimes macroaggression, we are let known that we really, more walls and ceilings need to break down. We also, as historians, so that's just within the ivory tower. When we often enter the archive, we are often met with violence, either through the silences or what we study. Yet, here we are. And so my first question to Dr. Ewing, Dr. Carter David, and Dr. Fletcher is, why are you doing what you do? And how does history allow for you to actually practice radical self-care? Go.
I guess I could start.
Okay, I'll go first.
Oh. Go ahead, Dr.
You
Fletcher.
want to go first, Siobhan?
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Dr. Fletcher, go.
Y'all are.
Since you are the new, you're the newest mentored person.
Exactly.
So okay, we have a 3-part question. So why do we do it?
Considering
Well,
I mean, a lot of people don't know exactly what we all go through.
right, right. So my my work focuses on the confinement of Black women, two women in particular, Fanny Keys Harvey and Lila White. And these women lived in Kentucky at the turn of the 20th century. They were incarcerated together. Miss Lila was incarcerated for poisoning her family with arsenic after being abused for many years. And she was 16 when she did it. Miss Fanny was arrested and served 3 sentences in the Kentucky State Penitentiary. She was a hustler. She was a numbers runner. She was arrested for robbery. She was arrested for, vagrancy, a whole host of times. But she made her way to the penitentiary after slicing the ear off of a police officer in Covington, Kentucky in 1895. So clearly they did not execute her or lynch her, because I've had the privilege of writing their stories, but she too was a survivor of domestic violence and confined in so many ways. And so one of the things that stood out to me, still stands out to me as I continue to write their stories is that what they experienced nearly 150 years ago, we're still experiencing right now. There is no difference. Historians always like to talk about change over time and if that exists and, the longue durée. No, it's the same. Black women are still experiencing the same things. But despite all of the violence in the archive, the violence that physical violence that was forced upon them, the silences in the archive that attempted to, eliminate their stories, they're still here, and I'm here to tell their stories. But it's also healing for me because when we do history, we are in conversation with the ancestors. And being in conversation with the ancestors helps you to identify, the path that you're on. They share their wisdom with you. And in turn, you heal yourself, but you also heal that ancestral trauma that you are constantly interacting with in the archive. So that's that's the key reason I would say that I do what I do. With, all that Fanny and Lila have gone through, I too am a survivor. And so it's one of those things where you're able to look back and say, I can go forward because these ancestors are pushing me to where it is that I need to be. And I have that strength. I have that resolve. Not that we're superwomen, not that we are, superhuman. But it's like, it's a kinship network. It's a certain type of mothering that keeps.
Dr. Carter, David.
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Fletcher. So what I did was, right before we started, I looked up a definition because we use the term self-care so often. And so the basic definition I think that applies to what we'll be talking about today is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, particularly during times of stress. And I would argue, and I don't think anyone would disagree, that is, as Black people in this country, it's always a time of stress. And so, we're humans. We deal with the same everyday, ordinary issues that everyone deals with. And then we have an extra layer of racism, and then we have anti-Blackness on top of it, which is different than the racism that a lot of other people of color experience. And so you know, when you ask why I do the work that I do, I can think about it in maybe two different ways. One has to do with my own teaching, and then one has to do with the research. And I think that I like to tell the story whenever someone asks about how did I get into this profession. I fell in love with Black people when I was 15. And that happened because I was in a class and a teacher was teaching me ridiculous nonsense about slavery that I knew intuitively was incorrect, even though I didn't really know. And it just led me down this path. And then I had this epiphany that I'm sure we all had, that like, oh my God, we're so dope. And like, it's all been a lie. And I cut my perm off, and then like everything just changed after that. And my life has never been the same, right? And so I think part of what I do, it helps me out because I think that like, I don't know if we want to use that late 19th, early 20th century term. We're race women, right? That's what we do. We do race. It's important to us. My Blackness is very important to me. It is not my only identity, but it is a very important one. And so part of the work that I do as a historian in terms of the teaching aspect, I think it gives me an opportunity to justify our existence, because our existence in this country is not justified just because we're human. It's justified because we literally built this country for free. And so we all know that, and it seems very simple, but our students don't always get it.
Right.
And they don't understand the way that affirmative action operated as for white people for generations upon generations. Affirmative action was white. I think there's a book by that name. And so doing this work helps me to make sense of all the craziness that is constantly happening to Black people all the time. And then when you know in your heart, as Dr. Fletcher said, that your ancestors are there, got your back, and I know that they're proud of the work that we do, that is healing for me. The other part of it, so the research part of it, that's separate from the teaching part, although obviously they overlap, is that I'm always amazed by the way that Black people create worlds within worlds. Like, we have literally taken the crazy, I mean, we have been thrust, it's literally unbelievable. And I say African Americans in particular, because unlike our brothers and sisters in other parts of the diaspora, we've always been a minority in this country. Like, so my husband's family, for example, is from Trinidad. You know, it's a different situation there. So we've had to be extremely creative in making sense of this process of cultural bricolage, of putting all these things together. And it amazes me, like, I've never stopped being amazed by you all. I haven't stopped. It's been happening since I was 15. And so when I'm digging in the archival record and pulling out what we've done in our magazines, or even when I've done some oral history work around other aspects of fashion, I focus on fashion in magazines. I'm just amazed by how we create all kinds of institutions, and some of them have no leader, right? Some of them do. We have the more formal examinations I might give a little later on if we get a chance to talk about the magazines I look at. But then we also have, I don't know, groups like the Nation of Gods and Earths, for example, right? Which has no leader, it was a founder, it's a loosely based group of, I don't know how many thousands of people of African descent who've created this thing, and it matters. It mattered where I grew up in the Bronx in the 80s and 90s. And so it's just amazing to me, and it's healing, and and it doesn't mean that I don't get that from examining other people's culture, that sometimes I watch a documentary or read a book about something and I'm enlightened on what, youth are doing in Mexico City. And that happened recently when I watched the film. But when I do it for my people, it gives me a sense of self. It gives me something to hand back to my children and everyone around me who doesn't get the opportunity to have the life that I have, where I do this for a living. It feels good to justify how dope we are and to keep it going. And I think that that's part of my purpose here on this earth, and it makes me feel good.
Thank you. Dr. Ewing.
And look, I gotta stop going last on stuff because y'all raised the bar so high. Thanks for having us, and thanks for sharing y'all's answers. I got the email you sent like right before we came in, so I did have a chance to kind of jot down some thoughts. And like for me, I gotta excuse me, I'm trying to fool with these overpriced AirPod things that are supposed to be of good quality. I don't know. But like I came from a storytelling family. And so like for me, history is just another way to do what I love, which is tell stories, right? And to tell stories that matter and to remind people of all this dope stuff that has happened. And so it kind of comes naturally. Like I started to send my mom a link, but she probably would have crashed this whole thing. But she tech problems on 10. but she's the reason why I got into this, because she's like a masterful storyteller. And my dad is like always in these books, and like he gave us Black children's books. Like remember like the heyday of Black bookstores and stuff. So like I grew up in that with Daddy on like the really formal side, and then Mama's like with all these stories. And so I feel like I'm doing what I was born to do, and it feels really good. And as far as the second part of that, like how does the discipline provide a space for self-care? I don't think it does. I think that we make the spaces, like we literally force it. So like ABWH, right? The Association of Black Women Historians, shout out, like the women that came before us created the space for us to then do the kinds of work that can be healing. And again, shout out to Dr. Fletcher for finding a way to create healing in the midst of such a traumatic topic. I think I went a softer route. A lot of the work that I do right now focuses on domestic archives. So for me, it's like a bit of a respite, because I get to contend with how women in their own personal, intimate spaces are dealing with these larger sources of terror. And so it's like a respite, but then like you still find these little moments of pain and terror popping out, because like that interior life exists on its own, yes, but also in a response to all this crap happening outside of that. So again, yeah, I'm a historian because I think I was literally born to be that. Shout out to the ancestors for that, even though they didn't choose me a path that made a lot more money. And as far as the self-care part, really, the self-care part, I think that the discipline doesn't do it, but we do it for ourselves within the discipline.
And so right before, I got on, I was thinking, if it had not been for this pandemic, I would be seeing you all anyway, right? Because we would be at our annual meeting, which is actually a space, Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which all of us tend to go to, if not annually, at least every few years. And that is one of the spaces where, as Black people, lay historians and professional historians, we get to regenerate. You all touched on some really interesting things. So I want to actually go a little bit further. And I think one common thread that everyone mentioned was ancestors and just loving Black people, loving Blackness, loving Black people, and wanting, I don't even know if there's a word. Sometimes I feel like our English language does not provide enough letters for us, or at least me, to articulate the love that we have for Black people, and how we want to share that love, and how and so when it comes to, and so I think that's also for me part of that self-care. Like as many of you mentioned, it's like that epiphany moment. You're like, oh snap, this is it. I'm going to do this, right? And then it branches out from there. So writing stories of these women, how should we think about these women of the past and how they practice self-care? Many of you are coming up with new paradigms, new narratives. How should we think about, and I say, and I know I'm a multiple question, how might we also try to get rid of some of those tropes, such as superwoman and long suffering, and how, and so I'll stop there, and because I know you and y'all will pick it up from there. So go ahead. Let's begin with Dr. Ewing.
If you think I didn't have my finger on the mute ready to go, but no, go ahead, Siobhan. Go ahead.
You know what I was going to say? I wonder if it makes sense to go in chronological order of our research.
Okay.
I'm just thinking, just because
okay,
the way they're going to do self-care is different in slavery and the Reconstruction era in the early 20th century versus my era, which is like post-civil rights.
Okay, so Dr. Fletcher and then Dr. Ewing.
Okay, so what does self-care look like for women in the 19th century or the late 19th century? For the women that I study, that varies. And a lot of times it doesn't necessarily look like what folks consider to be self-care in the 21st century. There were no spa days. There were no facials. Wasn't none of that happening. not for these women. But the point that is key is that they sought a respite in the midst of confinement. Everybody didn't have the same, everybody still doesn't have the same definitions of freedom. And for some folks, freedom wasn't an option. Everyone wasn't in search of freedom. They were just, or as we know from Closer to Freedom, Stephanie Camp's work, folks were truant. And a lot of times you see with the women that I work with, you see truancy. And that might be going down to the local bar and imbibing on her bourbon consistently. But that's all right, because that is her form of self-care. Just a moment, just a space to be able to just let it go. It might be going down to that same bar, that same juke joint, and just dancing all night, knowing what you're gonna have to go back to. And for some, I give the example of Lila quite often. So she's a child, she's 16. And she had been working as a domestic since she was 11 years old. And home, we tend to think of as this warm and fuzzy place. And, you know, that's where you go at the end of a long day. But for her, that's not where she wanted to be, because that's where the trauma occurred. That's where it persisted. And so she found self-care at her employer's home in a white household. She was a domestic for the county comptroller. And in that time period where she would stay late at night to work, she taught herself how to read and write. And so she was able to move through the rest of her life in a different way, because she had that space to do so. So it doesn't seem like the typical idea of what self-care should be, but sometimes it's not about just breaking free completely of whatever it is that's holding you down. Sometimes you just need that freedom in the moment. You need that respite and so that's what self-care looks like in the 19th century.
So I'm liking this idea of defining things on individual terms, right? So, and again, like this idea of respite. I just need a break, whatever that looks like, right? I need a break, be it in certain spaces or maybe even for certain people. But that idea of agency and taking, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Women are not monolithic beings.
Right. And I think, and you touch on something really interesting, right? In that you're looking at a certain class of women too.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Right. These are not your club women. These are not. They are not going down to. They're not sitting on the motherboard at church. They're not going to
church. Or if they do,
they're not going to church. They're going to the juke joint. And so for those who are, not, familiar with that particular history in terms of like the Black women movement, we all know what respectability is. And so we've all seen The Color Purple. Everybody wasn't going down to the church, and Miss Shug Avery showed you that. And so I'm talking about Shug Avery. I'm talking about Miss Seeley. These are the women who are often overlooked because of their class, your common everyday, I'm working to make ends meet Black woman. And even though we may fit into a similar socioeconomic status, that by no means, by no stretch of the imagination means that our experiences are the same, our desires are the same, or the ways in which we pursue those desires or those respites will be the same, because they won't. They won't. And so my goal to shed light on those women, because we tend to brush them off as
a certain way about them, not just brush them off, right?
True. Yes, that's a better way to say that. Absolutely, absolutely.
Dr. Ewing, dovetailing. I mean, Alberta Hunter,
Look,
come on, blues women. Tell me.
Look, Dr. Fletcher took me right where I need to be by introducing the cast of characters that I deal with. I don't know if it's going to show up all the way or not, but that sketch I have behind me, that's Alberta Hunter right there. So shout out to her. And shout out to the lady that sketched her. She couldn't quite get the arm right, so that's actually my mama's hand you're looking at on Alberta's body. Little improvisation there. Before I talk about Black women in self-care in like the early 20th century, so I don't want to get too far into Dr. Carter Davis territory, but shout out to Stephanie Evans for the work that she's doing on self-care. I knew, right? Because she takes this woman that we tend to associate with like struggle, and hard work and saving everybody, and she moves her from being like a warrior to a healer, right? I'm talking about Rosa Parks. Probably should have said that from the beginning, right? And I really like that work that she's doing. In my own work, when I'm thinking about Alberta Hunter, so she is a very public figure. She's an entertainer, right? She is out there on the circuit all the time, long days, long nights, people in your business, all this kind of stuff. And she wasn't frivolous. So she's very much a blues woman, but it's her job. So she's not even a real Suge Avery type. She don't want to be bothered. She goes there, she does her work. No, I'm not drinking with you. No, I'm not cutting a rug with you. I'm going home. So for her, self-care was treating a job like a job and never letting somebody think that the persona that she had on stage is who she was. And so her ethic of self-care is actually keeping people out of her business. And I love that because so much of Black women's lives have been constructed as public property and public interest. And so many Black women, including Alberta, are like, no, right? You're going to stay out of my business. And while she's working to make sure that she's not forgotten, right? So she's constantly putting a lot of stuff in the public intentionally. But she's doing what I call two-phase archiving, which is saving two different versions of herself, right? One for the public, one for herself. And I think that is one of the ways that she cared for herself. And it's something that a lot of Black folks are real familiar with, keeping folks out your business. Right. And I think that's also very different from not airing out your dirty laundry, right? This isn't about secrecy. It's about that very fundamental right to privacy. And she was very, very adamant about that.
Yeah, so that's so this idea of not only setting clear boundaries, which I think many of us are familiar with if we look back at some of the women in our lives. But one thing you mentioned that I think is also when we think about Black women and radical self-care is, as I mentioned to you all too, that Black women historically were all access. And the things that they did, meaning what I mean by all access, their body, people had access to their bodies, not just their physical bodies, their reproductive bodies, their laboring bodies. And so how did they, and so we also have to think about what did they keep for themselves, right, in order to sustain. And so as you mentioned, right, to keep something for yourself, that Miss Hunter kept something for herself. She put up, be it a wall, be it boundaries, all these things. And so we also, I think when we look at these histories, right, and we people, such terms as quiet as it's kept, or all these phrases that we know that Black women say, right? Black women's spaces. And when I talk about, I mean, I forgot to mention last night, I mean, versus last night, that was one of the most blackest womanist spaces that those two women let us in on, you know, talking about their own grief, you know, their cooking, how they nurtured one another, right? But still, I kind of felt like there was something they were keeping for themselves. So again, like knowing that, and even as an entertainer, Alberta Hunter is public property, but as you mentioned, right, she's very clear that this is my job. And you get that, and I'm sure Dr. Carter, because she does fashion and magazines and things like that, you know, we get that a lot with people separating, this is my job, don't confuse my labor from who I am. This is what I get paid to do. You do not have access to all of me. And that's something that you find at least if I find in my own work, and I'm sure you have all found in your own work too. Dr. Carter David, taking us to the mid 20th century to the 21st.
Yeah, so my work is really late 20th century, kind of beginning unofficially in 1970. And I think my archive is different than Dr. Fletcher and Dr. Ewing's because mine is more contrived and prescribed, right? So you all are writing about individual women. I write about magazines that are trying to be prescriptive and off a frame of reference for how Black women might live. And so I was thinking in this idea about how the women I write about experience self-care was really giving Black women the permission to talk openly in a magazine in an intraracial sense. Take Essence, for example, in ways that magazines like Ebony would not, to have a real conversation about the kinds of choices that were met with in the late 19th century. I'm sorry, late 20th century, I apologize. So I just thought of a couple of them. So first of all, I would think about the way that Essence, for example, engaged with the conversations around birth control. Keep in mind, Roe v. Wade is 1973. Essence magazine is founded in 1970. It's actually founded in 1968, begins publishing in 1970. And so it's 3 years later that abortion becomes legalized. And so a lot of these conversations that show up in a magazine, for example, around birth control, contraceptives, and abortion are rooted in this idea, these Black nationalist principles around raising a nation and the guilt that could come along with deciding to terminate a pregnancy, right? And, you know, we hear it all the time. But I'm thinking of a Nas lyric. What's that song he says? He says, you know, hood rats, don't abortion your wombs. We need more warriors soon, right? This guilt that Black women are supposed to feel when they decide to terminate a pregnancy because we're supposed to be, you know, raising up a nation. And so every child is terminated. And so, you know, there's some legitimate ways of talking about that. And there's also the reality of individual woman's life and her having the right to make a certain kind of decision and having a organ or a journal, magazine that she can go to and have conversation through reading with other women who are negotiating the same things. And that was important to me to read that. Like, wow, they were dealing with it at the moment. Now, of course, it's 2020 and we're thinking about the reversal of our reproductive rights as women. But it meant we're talking about the early 1970s, and we're thinking about not only in a way that's raced, but just women in general having to engage with this, for what the extra pressure that Black women have to deal with in thinking about carrying on a legacy and not allowing ourselves to be victims of a, you know, eugenic, what do you call it, family planning system. Then I also thought about another way is the way that these magazines talked about welfare and social services, and the way that Essence magazine tried to frame conversations around social services. We know by the time we get to 1970, for example, that Moynihan report had already been written. It's all this discourse around how problematic Black women are as matriarchs, and, you know, and then, you know, women who have to sit up and say, look, you can say what you want to say about me, but if I need assistance from the government, I am going to ask for it. And so these articles that are not shaming women about accepting, you know, so-called handouts, which I don't call them handouts, because if you ever worked, you paid into the system, right? And giving women a space to talk about that. And that as a form of self-care, for allowing women to feel free to do that if I need to. I'm going to get on, you know, food stamps or Section 8 until I can get myself together. And of course, there's a small minority of women who may use that as a way of living, but the vast majority of people use this as a transition to something else. So I think these magazines provided a context for these women to think about themselves as individuals who deserve to have birth control, who deserve to have family planning opportunities, who deserve to take advantage of a system that's there to help them. And then another way I would think about is when it comes to sex, because keep in mind, this is the 1970s. We just come out of this moment of, not everybody's engaging in some kind of free love hippie, experience, but it is definitely a loosening of sexual mores. We see a rise in the divorce rate. And we see a lot of the inclusion of articles. And by the way, there's reader responses to this too. And then there's editorials that come out in response to that. And then there's all kinds of opinion pieces about, dating married men. I just jotted some things down. Same-sex love in a time where people may not have been interested in talking about this or feeling open to talk about this in magazines. These are all issues that magazines like Essence were engaging. Having multiple sexual partners and how to make sure you don't get pregnant and catch a disease while doing it. Shacking up, which was a big deal. I mean, now we don't think about it as a big thing. It was still a lot of social pressure to get married, right? To before you cohabitated with someone. And then of course, later on, by the time we get to the mid to late 80s, a conversation around AIDS and women having honest conversations in the magazine as well about how they contracted it. And so, so I just threw those some ideas around ways that magazines are shaping an idea about what it means to be a Black woman. It allows you to be free in some ways, and at the very least, understand you're not the only one, and the choices you're making are legitimate. Right or wrong, in whoever's eyes, they're legitimate. They're legitimate responses to the social conditions that you're facing right now.
So what I'm noticing between all three of you we're talking about, and I deal a lot with this in class, especially classes on when I teach about culture, and especially Black women's culture, are spaces. Be it the juke joint, be it the club, be it a magazine where Black women connect with other Black women. What are so going back to, I guess, thinking about the history of and now I'm thinking of one of my favorite people to think about is Anna Julia Cooper. And right before this afternoon, I actually watched Dr. Evans's video on self-care, and Dr. Anna Julia Cooper talked about Black women as, not only did she write When and Where I Enter, the whole race enters with me, right? She also sees Black women as the source of regeneration, right? So if we are to think about Black women as spaces and as the source of regeneration, what does the future look like in regards to self-care?
Can I begin?
Sure.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to use this opportunity now to share what I was able to pull together of my images. So, and I think that this speaks a little bit, at least, to the future. Okay, so what you're looking at here is one is a American Airlines ad. They're both 1970s. I apologize that I don't have the exact dates or page numbers, but they're both from Essence magazine. And it's about travel. And I have taken a lot of joy. I'm in some of these travel groups on Facebook. And one of the big ways that I think, major ways that Black women in the last few years that I can think of have pushed this notion of self-care is tied into the right for us to disrupt this idea of mapping our bodies by moving beyond the boundaries of where we're supposed to be. The sister's book, Demonic Grounds. Oh gosh, I apologize. Dr. Ewan, you're nodding your head. I apologize.
McKittrick.
It's escaping me. Yes, McKittrick, right. And so, some of this is about very theoretical text, but about how sometimes your destiny is going to be determined by where your body lands and then tied into your skin color and how you're mapped in particular kind of ways. And I think a lot of these travel groups are pushing back against this idea. Not only that Black women can travel, but that we can travel to the places you don't think we're going to be, right? So yeah, you might see me on a Caribbean island. You might see me going to even Carnival in London, but are you going to see me in Asia? Just these different kinds of places where we wouldn't normally show up. But a precursor to that is Black women travel, which obviously predates this moment in the 1970s. I focus on the 1970s because I'm a scholar of this era, but I had wrote an article a few years ago, a book chapter, and it focused on Black women in travel in the 1970s. This is at a time where we're only very recently moving out of a moment of segregation. So where Black women, Black people in general, had the opportunity to travel in ways that we couldn't before. But also, it's cheaper to fly. And so now we have ordinary, everyday, maybe lower middle class people who can afford to buy flights, places, and travel. And so what happens in Essence magazine in the 1970s is all these, I would call them self-care articles. Some of them are love stories about traveling. As you see here, this woman since often makes it possible to see things more clearly. I think she was getting over love and met somebody in Paris, and this is her looking at the Eiffel Tower from her window. Here you see this American Airlines ad, 2 Black women who are on their way somewhere. But these women are making a decision to travel in a way that they wouldn't have been able to afford because they wouldn't have been able to afford before. Also can travel where they want to, even though we know discrimination still exists. We can go to places we can't go before, but also it's the 1970s, right? Some folks call this the me decade. We have the intersections of second wave feminism, but then also this Black nationalist principle that people are really engaged with. And this all gave Black women the freedom to not only travel to certain kinds of places that may or may not have a cultural connection, but also going sometimes alone to search for love or just sex. Sometimes it was just going for sex, right? And so these stories were very, I loved reading these stories as I was looking through this working on this piece. Travel stories, some of them are based on love, some of them are based on just sex. Some of it is, again, prescriptive stuff, like make sure, you have this, and this before you go. And, we're Black women, so make sure you dress a particular kind of way because they're going to think you're a prostitute if you're standing on the corner. Or, or just some of these ads that are making you feel comfortable, like maybe I can buy a ticket. And so I just think that I'm happy to see Black women traveling. And I think this is just this article that I wrote kind of looks back on the way we were talking about this in the 1970s at a time when a girl like me could probably afford to buy a plane ticket to travel somewhere and could feel perfectly fine about going there and meeting people and having sex because there's a different kind of way that we're engaging with our sexuality in a public context. So I just, and I don't get to travel as much as I would like, certainly, but I admire those who do. And I think it's an amazing way for us to think about the future of self-care and showing up in places where you're not supposed to be.
So if I can jump in here, I want to go back to sex.
Yes.
But I want to go back there. Because Siobhan brings up this right on time when you're talking about the 70s and the idea of free love. And I just wrote a short piece on Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, and have been in deep conversation.
Wait a minute, you have to explain who those 2 women are.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera are I would consider them to be the vanguard of the modern LGBTQ movement, rights movement. They were leaders at Stonewall 51 years ago, the founders of STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. They, worked to make sure that LGBT youth in New York in the 70s did not go homeless. They had food when folks got locked up. Marsha P. Johnson made it a point to make sure that folks got housing and medicine, and they were HIV AIDS activists, and just dear to my heart. And so we definitely associate the 70s and the 80s with this broader acceptance of sexuality, but those things were also happening in the middle of the Victorian era, where think of everybody as prudish. And yeah, there were a lot of prudes. However, there were still people, particularly Black women, who were making conscious decisions about who they wanted to be with, when they wanted to be with them, and where. And that in and of itself, that the ability to make those choices despite society saying, you know, you're a loose woman, you're the, you know, that stereotype of the Jezebel. There's still you're still busting out of your confinement or finding that respite in your confinement by harnessing your power and making decisions about your sexuality and enjoying your sexuality. That's key. When we think of sex workers in the late 19th century, at the turn of the 20th century, you know, even today, people tend to think of sex work as, you know, something that someone may be forced into. And yes, those cases exist. However, there are tons of folks who engage in the sex industry because they want to. They have and that is self-care, because they are indulging their pleasures, they're indulging their sexuality. And so I think that, you know, sometimes you have folks who just, we're not gonna talk about that. We gotta talk, you know, the patriarchy, but being able to harness that, that in and of itself is self-care, particularly for Black women. And I'm here for travel. Let's go.
Can I just piggyback on that point really quickly? I think that it is an important point because when we think about sex as self-care, sex feels good. Nature made it that way, right? And then, of course, all the ways that Black women have to fight against stereotypes about our sexuality. And then also saying, but there has to be a way to just be sexual that I want to. And I appreciate that that's doing that. I could be wrong, but I think there is a paper that needs to be written, and maybe it already has, I don't know, about what Rihanna has done in terms of self-care and sex, and a woman who has been unapologetically sexualized in her way of doing things, and the pushback against that. Because I remember not that long ago where I was like, oh gosh, she's showing under boob or under cleavage, whatever it's called, and you know, and just, but yeah, it's a way to talk about it. And I think self-care is giving ourselves the freedom to do that, and that's kind of new for us, and you're right, as Black women.
Well,
I agree in that way, and for it not to be as stigmatized.
So a couple weeks ago, I got into this conversation on Son of Baldwin, and we were talking about, and this is also what I would love for Dr. Ewing to pick up too, is we were talking about Janet Jackson and desire and pleasure, right? And how she's often, as you know, overlooked in regards to, here's a woman that actually but performed self-pleasure and desire. And how do, and when you think about this history, right, she comes from a long lineage of women, you know, Ma Rainey, all these blues women, and prior to that, that performed pleasure, right? They stood outside the respectability, you know, that line of respectability politics. They took the hit for it, right? And so that negotiating that line, you know, because, you know, it's something to be said in the 21st century. I think I've just finished also, I'm doing a lot of watching of videos today. Kimberly Foster did something critiquing WAP, and she was mentioning the hoe aesthetic, right? And, you know, so we've come somewhere that we have begun to theorize Black women desire, and possibly moving out from desire for desire's sake and not for desire for labor's sake, or desire to be, you know, as a certain class thing. But, you know, I think as a, you know, group of people, we are still, respectability politics, it's always pushed up against, right? We're always pushing up against that. And so it'd be interesting to think of a new shift in how we think about Black women and desire, and the history of Black women and desire. All right.
Did you just give me that question? Lord, I'm thinking I'm going to answer the other question. So really quickly to answer your second question, and then I'll double back to the initial one. You're right. I think this is a place where what I do actually overlaps with what Dr. Fletcher does, right? Because the women that I study, these blues women, they're also more likely to be arrested, right? And then that places them right in the clutches of the carceral state. And if we think about, say, women like Billie Holiday, right? Like she is right there at juggling these worlds, right? And a lot of what happens to her is because of these ideas of respectability and whatnot, right? So you're right, Janet Jackson and Rihanna and her underboob, and that is part of a long lineage of women, you know, going all the way back to like Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Lucille Bogan, my goodness. And if anybody's not familiar with Lucille Bogan, start with Shave 'Em Dry. Let's just go ahead and get right into that one. I will not be quoting that on anything recorded, but yeah, Shave 'Em Dry, Lucille Bogan. Check that out. So here I was prepared to do all the unsexy stuff, and you dropped me right into the middle of the sex. I'm going to come out of the sex, okay? I'm going to cool everybody off, and I'm going to answer that initial question. Lord, by let's say, so where do we go from here? Like, what do we get if we center the experiences of Black women in self-care? And my first thought was, we get free, right? And we get free by investing in self-care. And again, to speak to Dr. Fletcher, I love calling you Dr. Fletcher, I love it. To get into Dr. Fletcher's research, right? This means prison abolition, right? This means truly loving Black people. So I'm going to give a 3-generational response to this prompt about self-care, right? Because in the world that we live in, it's still, sadly enough, radical for a Black woman to choose herself. And it's even more radical for her to choose herself without apology, right? Because a lot of times when Black women say, well, I'm going to do this for myself, you got to explain it. You know, you have to perform being apologetic. And so to go back to what Dr. Carter David said about Rihanna, so unapologetic. You know, I'm going to give you the underboob. I'm going to give you the traditional cleavage. I'm going to give you the nipple. You're going to get it all. And you're going to deal with this sexiness. So my grandma, when she would choose herself, she would apologize. My mom still tends to explain, not as much, but she explains. And so every day, like, I'm trying to be a woman that does neither of these things because it's draining, right? And I don't always succeed, but I think that attempting to be somebody who does not apologize and who does not explain, that's how I care for myself. So for my grandma, she's like, just think old school Mississippi woman, you know, out in the country and whatnot. What she would do to care for herself, and thank you, Dr. Fletcher, for bringing up a vice, right, as a way to care for oneself, as you brought up that good old bourbon, right? Shout out to that good old brown. But my grandma, she would smoke, right? So it was smoking or like pretending to smoke. So she would have, she loved the cool menthols in the green pack, right?
Yes, yeah.
And
yeah.
yes.
Unfiltered.
So, I think she had to feel it. I don't think she was a real G about this. But so she would go out on the back porch with this one cigarette, right? And she would smoke half of it while looking out on her garden in this chicken coop. And for me, I think that the cigarette was like a boundary, right? Like it's a literal smoke screen to create time for herself, because she could say, hey, y'all got to get away from this smoke. Y'all can't be out here, you know, your lungs. But she would say, I'm sorry, baby, you shouldn't be out here with this smoke. It was a smoke screen. I never actually saw her finish an entire cool. And those were supposed to be the good ones, the menthols, you know, but she never finished it, right? And for my mom, like self-care for her will be like talking on the phone for hours with women that she's been friends with since she was in diapers. And so no matter what's going on, like with her own kids, and she had 2 Gemini children, shout out to her. But no matter what's going on in her life, right, they will remind her of who she was, who she is. They ground her. And like that taught me how to cultivate my own lifelong friendships. But she also, to go back to what Dr. Fletcher said about Weiss, they would dress up to the nines. Like think about like the 90s, 80s, 90s, like sequins, like that's the jam. Sequins and nylons, like they will have it on. And but here's where the kind of apologetic, like explaining thing comes in. She never said, we going to the casino. Right, so I grew up in Memphis, and so Mississippi is like literally a stone's throw, and they would go down to Tunica. They would always say, "We going down the street," right? And if they went to Arkansas to the dog track, they would say going across the bridge. But it was never I'm going to the dog track. It's never I'm going to the casino. But and it's because it's a vice. But for her, it's fun. But like that's how she cared for herself. And so for me, it's about like allowing myself the grace that's necessary to show up. Hell, for this, I was put on a t-shirt. I was like, no, I'll do a little better. Put on this dashiki, right? Because I'm home, I'm in a pandemic, and I can't sit up here and lie about, being gentle with yourselves and all that kind of stuff, and then stress myself out about whether or not I'm gonna bust out of my dress shirts with all this COVID weight, right? Like, I couldn't go through that. Or like even here, like you see, was like a mostly plain background. Shout out to Bird, shout out to the Anna Costa poster, which is dope. I can show y'all later. So you see like this mostly plain thing, but in front of me, like I see beauty, right? I see like antique cameras, I see custom art, big art, shelves full of books, my record player. I love records. Like I am surrounded by beauty everywhere I look, but that's for me. I'm gonna get around to doing this stuff, but when I set up my home office, I prioritize what I was gonna see beyond the work. And for me, like that's a way of caring for myself, even while I'm working, kind of like how when Alberta Hunter goes to work, right? She's still caring for herself by keeping that boundary there. Like you only get a certain portion. I'll be clear. When I finish decorating, I'm going to stunt on y'all with an amazing background, but I had to pay myself first.
Nice. Oh my gosh. Any questions? I am like so full because I mean, it just, and I loved how Dr. Ewing, you brought in our mothers. I think, be it our mother, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, I think we all share similar experiences with our mothers. Often wonder, my mom was always, you got to get up early. I'm like, I'm never getting up early. Now I realize, like, why my grandmother got up at 5 a.m. It's like, that was peace. That was peace. But you also, I mean, again, this idea of regeneration, I think, was also there. My experience growing up, women, as you all mentioned, sometimes they grew up in eras that the era was confining, not just the people around them, but the era that they grew up in was confining. And they found, to borrow that term for Dr. Fletcher, those moments of respite, whatever that was, right? And it was the sort of the veiled lie. I'm going across the bridge, and I'm very familiar with that bridge because I live right by that bridge. Or smoking that cigarette, or, just any of those small, I mean, they were just so minute, right? But it was for them. It was theirs. Yeah.
I just wanted to say one thing. So I think, Dr. You did an amazing job talking about fashion and then even what design could look like. Because I know some people, we might be concerned about what people see behind us now that we're on these Zooms. You're concerned about what you're looking at, right? But also, when you talk about that cigarette, I remember reading one of Andre Leon Talley. He was an editor-at-large for Vogue for many years, a black brother from North Carolina. He talked about luxury, but we might think about it as self-care. He talked about how his grandmother I think she was some kind of domestic, but what she made sure is that every week she had crisp white sheets on her bed. And she washed them and she hung them outside to dry in the sun. And that was luxury for her. But I think self-care is another way of thinking about that, because those sheets were clean. I'm sure they smelled good. They were cool on her skin. And as hard as her life may have been, that is something that she had to make herself feel good. And it could be like a cigarette, or it might be
2-inch heel.
Cutting up your AP a little bit. Right. Exactly.
Right. It's your heels. I know a lot of women, it's their heels, or that fur coat. So yeah. Anything else? I know we are only scheduled for an hour, so I don't want to take up too much time. If anyone has questions, thank you for people who saying that they learned a lot. Again, a shout out to Dr. Evans, who, as Dr. Ewing mentioned, it's doing this great recovery work on Rosa Parks and looking at how her use of self-care through yoga. And it also made me think of people like Tina Turner, who became a Buddhist, and other ways that, you know, if we want to go down the spiritual path, right, how Black women are somehow moving away from Christianity and it's choosing other methods of spirituality to empower themselves. And I think that's also important when we think about self-care. And what else? My notes.
You have a question, Dr. Stanley.
What does self-care look for us, and what do we take time to indulge in? I'll let y'all go with that. Thank you. Kadia. Hi, Kadia. Go ahead.
You know what? I'll take a stab at it while we still have Vice on the table and whatnot. I like to, when I can, watch movies. I'm really missing being able to go into the theater. But I guess the upside of me having to watch more films at home is that I can also enjoy it with things that only people over a certain age should enjoy, right? Some nice bourbon. Trying to keep this work appropriate. Naps. Like, I don't know if y'all have heard about the nap ministry, but like, get into that. Like, I have been on these naps since college. So like, I'm really glad that you have this Black woman that is leading the charge and saying, look, sisters, lay it down, recharge your body. Everything's still gonna be there when you get up. Take a nap, right? And so I'm on that. Nature, pets. Thankfully, the kitten finally went to sleep. When we first started, it was like literally crawling up my shirt. But like, there's something that's really soothing to me about like animals, and being in nature. So that's pretty much what I do.
So self-care for me has been, and some of it's the same. Adult beverages always nice. Nature's always nice. I have a backyard. But one thing that has been self-care for me, especially since we've been in quarantine or social distancing, whatever we're doing in this pandemic, and I'm home with my kids, is laying on the bed with them, watching movies on my laptop, and I don't have any directives for them, and I'm not forcing my son to eat his vegetables, and I'm not forcing my daughter to, finish her math homework, and it's just us watching, a Nollywood movie or some crazy cooking show. And I'm not being mommy that has to be like overbearing and disciplinary. I'm being mommy that's just like laying here in my, camisole and my pajama pants with my kids, just watching a movie. Like being their mom without having to police their behavior or make them do something. That has been really nice, to just enjoy them as people.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I have a little person as well. She's 9, and we do the same thing. She loves Minecraft. We watch Minecraft together, but I'm here for the naps. I'm here for the naps all day, every day. I'm here for naps. I'm here for bourbon. I'm a Kentucky girl. So I'm here for, that's how we get down. But I think my latest self-care method, one includes chamomile bubble baths. My sister makes My sister makes these bath salts, and she's in DC. And she, organic chamomile flowers and I don't know what else she puts in it, but it takes everything away. It's a beautiful thing. So between that, and I have a disco playlist. So every morning I get up about 6:30 and we start the day with Sylvester's You Make Me Feel. Mighty real.
Yes, hype music.
Yes, that's what. I'm also a nature person. I'm one of those people who, I left the church a long time ago, and so I've been practicing a traditional African faith tradition for the past 10, almost 15 years. So when things get super, super stressful, I'll just go and sit by the river and just listen to her run, listen to her rush, and it just calms me down.
My self-care at the moment, I'm constantly practicing. I've actually gone the opposite way with imbibing. Those of you who know me know I can. So, and I love, occasionally having Zoom, wine, social hour, but I've been taking the opposite thing. And because I'm trying very much to be present. I think my mind, because of this pandemic, because I'm teaching Black women's history and I'm teaching FAM 1, and the trauma when you go through early America, conquest of early America. And so I need to be present. I need to, be in touch because it's so easy to numb out. Walks, I'm doing walks. And I actually wrote this in my syllabus, grace. I'm trying to extend grace and I'm trying to give grace to myself. For my students though, it's like, okay, we still got deadlines, but, and I'll set those boundaries, but I think grace is so important. And giving myself permission to, I'm human, and so forgiveness and grace are things that I'm actively trying to practice. And so I think that's part of, and gratitude. I do gratitude a lot, and so you see behind me, I have like my incense and my sage, and, I need to get my office like Dr. Ewing, because right now it's a hot ass mess, but as of right now, it's like, but I mean, yeah, those are the three things, gratitude, and grace, and just being kind to myself, just extending kindness to myself and kindness to others. And that's so hard to do. I think, during this time where, that we're limited. I mean, so that's it.
And we have a request for the chamomile body bubble Instagram. Seriously, we do. We have a request.
Yeah.
And then you put it in the chat box. Yeah, we're serious with that one. And we have a question. How do you just lay down and not be involved in every minute of every day all the time?
I'll let you guys.
Let me, I can take a stab at it because it might be a little easier for me as somebody that is child free, right? So that's like one less hurdle for me. Like when I want to lay it down, I lay it down, right? Unless, like, so I take care of 2 senior citizens, right? But taking care of adults is kind of a different beast. I can tell, my 74-year-old father, like, Dad, just take a nap. We'll go do something so I can take my nap. What I've learned to do at night, 'cause I'm a morning person, and Dr. Carter Davis, she sees me coming to the writing group, hoodie and do-rag on. It's my writing outfit, it's my comfort zone. But sometimes, like, when there's just so much on your mind, if you're trying to take a nap or if you're trying to shut it down for the night, what I do is use those little noisemaker, like the ambient sound apps with the water. I love that. The night sound, like the little crickets. I'm a country girl. I like that. Or audiobooks. I am obsessed with audiobooks. Like, I've been getting it in. Yes, thumbs up. Like, I have gotten in so many books. And a lot of times it's stuff that's like for work. So I'm just going to plug this right quick. I was able to preview an audiobook before teaching. I'm teaching it this semester. Right. But then I'm also, like, right now I'm listening to a book about 3 Chinese showgirls around World War II. Like, there's a reign. It's so dope. It's so dramatic. It's so messy. But it kind of takes me back to childhood where my mom worked at night, so she couldn't do this. My dad, he would read to us every night. And so if I'm listening to a book, I'm in the bed, I'm out. Which is why it's really good that audiobooks have those little bookmarks, because I'm going to forget everything. So maybe try like the ambient sound things or the books, and try to just drown out all this other stuff that you're going to have to do. And if it's something that you're afraid that you're going to forget, like, keep a little notepad by the bed and just write it down. Okay, I got to do this stuff when I get up. But just allow yourself that, because whatever is on your mind, whatever's stressing you out, it's going to be there. And it's not going to be the end of the world. I promise you, it's not going to be the end of the world.
And you bring up another point that we, probably could touch on a little bit deeper, is mental health. Like we've talked about self-care in ways that when we talk about spaces and how women, but that's also about mental health. And so let's be clear that when we talk about, it's not just walking and physical health, it's also about mental health. And one of the reasons why I asked you about the future of how should we look at Black women and self-care, again, we need to get rid of this strong Black woman trope so much. It has, is killing us, right? And I think a lot of us have sort of the same story. Well, I never saw my mother cry, or I never saw my grandmother cry, or I never saw it's like they cried, you just didn't see it. And is it to our detriment that we didn't? Or, because in that sense, it's also about their self-care too, that, they're protecting us. But, mental health, Black women and mental health, that is something that we need to address. And I think that stigma within the Black community that, God can solve your problems, or, just buck up and be strong, or that's nothing. We need to acknowledge that that's not helpful. That is not helpful at all. It keeps, Black women in bad situations, keep Black people in bad situations, but Black women in particular in really bad situations. And it makes us feel bad about ourselves, because ultimately we think we're comparing ourselves to someone else, right? Without knowing, that other, you can't do it. You can't like, oh, they got it worse than us. Well, worse than me. You don't know some other woman's situation. You just don't. So, so I hear you when, you just can't turn off the mind. I get that. But if it's beyond that, I'm always telling my students, like, seek out, talk to somebody. It's okay. It's okay.
And real quick, because I see Dr. Fletcher unmuted. Dr. Stephanie Evans, she got a book for that too.
Yes, she got a book. Yes, it's coming out. Yes, Stephanie Evans got a book for everything.
She got a book for everything. It's good.
You had a book. Dang, Stephanie Evans.
I don't forgot what I was gonna say. I'll come back to it because I lost my thought.
Self-care, getting help, mental health. Which one?
Yes, religion and just pray away. That ain't gonna work. The Creator made the people who can help you. And so you have to go and seek out the blessings that's out there for you, whether it's in the form of a therapist, whether it's in the form of group therapy. We tend to run from these things, and I'm a good one for it, where, I can't say I never cry, but I am one of those folks who say to myself, if my grandmother made it through this, I can make it through. I'm real good for that. When I had my daughter, I was terrified, but I kept saying to myself, if my great grandmother had 11 children in a cold camp in Appalachia, I can do this. But that diminishes what I'm feeling. That diminishes my fear. I'm not expressing those things. I'm holding it in. And that's not fair to me. It's not fair to me, but it's also not fair to my little one in 30 years when she becomes a mother. You have to be able to share. This is how we learn from each other. This is what that regeneration looks like going forward. Because we're very good at keeping secrets. We're very good at keeping secrets. And those secrets can keep us stuck in the same space, generation after generation after generation, simply because we don't want to talk about things. And we don't want to talk about that trauma. because the healing process can be scary. It can be very scary. Sometimes healing is more, is scarier than the trauma itself.
Reliving of it all, yeah. And sitting with it, tearing down those walls, yeah.
So I've been lucky enough to be a member of a group that my mother has put together. My mother's turning 66 this year. I'm turning 41. And her group is called Strong Links, and it's a bunch of her friends. Some of them are most of them are from her church, but not all of them. And I noticed something. So we're talking about these generational issues around self-care. I noticed something a couple months ago when I was talking to them. They are constantly, and most of these women are probably over the age of 55, some of them in their 60s. They have a totally different relationship with taking time for themselves than we do. They don't take time for themselves. I was shocked. Just the simple act of leaving your grandchildren alone, or telling one of my mother's friends, telling her daughter that she can't watch the grandchildren so she can go do this. I said, my friends are always doing things. We find the time. And so we got into this conversation about how our generation is doing a totally different thing in terms of self-care than our mothers did. And I say all that to say, I think we're realizing, and it's changing, the story we're telling ourselves about what it means to be a strong Black woman is definitely changing. And I noticed it after these months of being on these calls with these women twice a week. I'm like, I don't understand why they just don't. But it's not that they can't.
Right.
Because they don't have other people who are doing it with them. But for us, y'all not going to shame me if I'm like, I'm leaving my kids with my husband, I'm out. I'm going to be gone for 3 days. Y'all going to be like, yes, you should. No, the older generation, it's more complicated for them. So I think for the future, I think we're doing something a little better. And I would say for whoever was asking about how do we just lay down, the only way I can guarantee that I'm going to go to sleep is by reading a book. That's the only guarantee. Anything else is difficult. But yeah.
Yeah, carving them out. You have to be intentional. I think you have to be intentional with self-care. Right. All right. Anything else, Dr. Irvin? Before we close, last night, can we just talk about that for like 30 seconds, please? If you didn't watch it, it's okay.
We watched it.
That's a different conversation if you didn't watch it and you get into it. But can we just talk about the sisterhood? I felt sisterhood. I felt the space. I felt love. I felt so much. Yeah. So thoughts as historians, as observers of culture, as people who do this, or from our audience, anything?
It was the feeling of parents having children in the late 70s, early 80s. That's what it felt like to me. That was kind of like the soundtrack to your childhood, like in the background.
Oh my God, yes.
But it makes you realize that the music, I think, that people enjoy and that they hold close to, it's really, I think, it's just a basis of nostalgia. Every generation talks about how the next generation's music is trash, but really at the end of the day, it's what you remember and what you attach to that music, right? People say those things about how hip hop is horrible, but these young kids today, that's going to be the music that they like. I remember when, and it was just amazing. It was just amazing.
So do you think in 20 years from now, you're going to have because I watched it through IG. Like there was over 500,000 people.
Do we know that everybody knows what we're talking about?
I don't know. I'm assuming.
The verses, because some of the students might not have watched it. Gladys Knight and Patti LaBelle.
Oh, that's true.
Some of the students might not have. They might be like, "What are they talking about?"
That's true. Sorry.
My question: can we share what exactly? So, can you tell us what you're talking about, real quick?
The verses last night between Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight, and them basically not going through their entire catalog, but some of their top songs, and in between talking about their personal relationship and politics, and basically creating a space that I think a space that when you watch Versus, that's created. But for them, it was, they've known each other over what, 50, 60 years, right? And so it was and so you got to hear them talk about, cooking and their losses, and and basically love on each other in ways that, first I was like, is this for real? But I mean, but just see them love on each other. And I think the other thing that I was quite surprised by was at least on IG, the 500,000. And so you got to see, it became truly about a Black community. Not that everyone that was there was, racially Black. However, at that moment, I think everybody was sharing within Black spaces and Black culture.
It felt like Sunday dinner.
Yeah.
It felt like Sunday dinner or the Friday night fish fry, where, everybody just gets together and family reunion type of. And I surely was not expecting to see Dionne Warwick, but that's a whole nother conversation. I was not expecting to see her. So that was a beautiful thing.
That was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
As somebody who studies Black women entertainers, I was glued to the iPad and watching that. What I loved, in addition to the performances, the storytelling, the way that Patti LaBelle had her shoes brought up on stage, and she said, I miss performing. So she brought what she missed about the old way of performing into this new format, and that was really dope to see. But also, as a historian, I love her citational practice.
Right.
Everything was so-and-so wrote this, so-and-so performed this. The way that she exhibited care in a really particular Black woman's way, when she lovingly said, that little heifer sung man at the table, right? She wasn't throwing this talented young woman under the bus. She took what is basically a pejorative, right, and made it a term of endearment, and that shows us something about Black linguistics. It was just so dope. And I think that it was a master class in looking at Black entertainment as Black history, as Black culture. There's something else I was going to say about the audience, but I'm gonna say that for later, because I got concerns about where Versus is going with some of these matchups people are suggesting. I'm can we just keep something for ourselves?
Right.
And that's what I'm gonna say about that. Can we keep something to ourselves, please? Because there was that the article that came out on the Root, explaining Black aunties.
Oh yeah, I was so upset by that. Yeah, I was upset by that. Yeah.
Sometimes it's okay to say nothing, right? And just let us keep what we have to ourselves.
I felt
that's enough.
I liked about the Verses, I enjoyed the beginning before the competition started. It wasn't competition, before the music started. I think back to what's the DJ said something about women can be in competition for things that are good instead of being competitive for the attention of men. And not that these women are competing, but that Versus is supposed to be us sort of laying two seemingly equal, musicians, putting them together with one another. And I liked how they kind of hint or skim on the outskirts of this notion, we're supposed to be in competition and we're supposed to have an issue with one another, but we don't. And I think when we, but I like you just kind of skimming out on the surface. And I just thought that was just amazing to show that, despite the stories that people like to make up, Black women do stick together when it counts. That has been my personal experience. And that as we get older and we're dealing with these issues, these mean girl issues that can pop up, that we learn how to disarm one another when it's necessary. And that was just an example of how that works. That's why, we can't listen to what people say about us because it's not true.
Right.
Black people stick together more. I'm I love my Black folk. I'm not understanding what you're talking about. Right.
And I think that was also the part, people wanted this beef. And it's they were not they're no, that's not us. That's not us. As a matter of fact, we're gonna bring out our third sister right now, so y'all know. My favorite part, of course, when Patti LaBelle dropped Heffa, And it reminded me of, you know, my childhood. And that was also occasionally, you never knew, depending on the tone of how it came out, if it was a term of endearment or a term of you better get your, you know, out of here real quick, or you better do this. And so, but so it became like this, as Dr. Ewing mentioned, like this master class in Black linguistics, Black culture, Black womanhood, you know, how we talk to each other. Because if you heard, when you heard that, you clearly knew that she was not disparaging her, right? It was not a pejorative. But at one moment I went like, oh, I hope. And then I'm like, no, this is Black folks. Like, this is for Black folks. And so if anybody had any, like, that's what happens when you're in Black spaces. Outsiders, if outsiders have a question, then that's an issue. But I mean, for insiders, most, I think they got it. They understood. Your mic.
I was talking too. I was really into it too. I don't even know what. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Stanley, Fletcher, Ewing, and Carter David. You all rocked. We kept our participants. We had some interactive questions. We will add questions from your conversation into the journal. So people who weren't here can reflect on the things that you all, I've been taking notes like ridiculously. But I really want to thank you all. Thank you all for attending. Thank our panelists for giving us this 90 minutes of serious, interesting. I've learned a lot. I thank you. I don't even know what word to say than thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to thank them too. I mean, I love my sisters, and so you know,
Yeah.
Thank you.
You all put this together on paper, because I'm not even going to tell you about Dr. Stanley. You all put this together on paper in like 3 days. Martha's on the line with me. It was serious. So she called, you all ran, and you answered, and that just shows you what we do. So with that said, I thank you all. I will send you the registration for the other parts of the series. You are welcome to attend. Invite any and all that you want to show up, and we would welcome all. With that said, I thank you and good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Love y'all. Y'all have a good one.
This was great.
I know, right? We did it.
And self-care, I'm going to bed after this. After a glass, you know.
I got to take the morning.
You got to give me my meeting back. You still got permission. Would you please give me my meeting back?
Oh, man. Okay. Oh, my gosh. I love the
recording.
Thank you. Wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, but this conversation has made me feel, because I was going to stay up and try to work. No, after this, the day's over. It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
And I just Val is actually, Girls Trek did those conversations during the summer. And that's what the next one is about. I forgot to say, it's the Daughters of. So we saw a lot of the conversations with Nikki Giovanni and Angela Davis.
Right. Yeah.
So that was, that's what started this whole thing. But thank you. Kim, would you please stop the recording so I can get...
Sorry. How do I do this? Stop recording. Okay, there you go. Do you want to stop recording? Yes.